To understand Sly Stone is to understand a paradox. He was a visionary who fused rock, soul, funk, and psychedelia into a joyous, unifying sound that defined an era. Yet he was also a man plagued by deep-seated suspicion, paranoia, and resentment that ultimately consumed him. His hatreds were rarely simple jealousies or petty rivalries. They were complex, deeply personal reactions to business betrayals, artistic theft, and the immense pressure of being a black innovator in an exploitative industry. The bands and figures he clashed with form a map of his own insecurities, struggles, and the immense weight of his own genius. Based on biographies, most notably Joel Selvin's An Oral History, and accounts from those within his orbit, these are the 6 entities that elicited the most potent animosity from Sly Stone. It seems counterintuitive that Sly Stone would harbor ill will towards the Beatles, the biggest band in the world, who were also his ardent admirers. The animosity, however, wasn't directed at their music, but at the bitter business war that followed their failed courtship. In 1969, at the absolute peak of his powers, Sly Stone was offered a monumental deal. The Beatles, through their newly formed Apple Records, saw him as the quintessential artist to launch their label into a new stratosphere. They offered him a deal rumored to be worth $1 million, an astronomical sum at the time. Sly verbally agreed. He even recorded his masterpiece, "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again," with the intention of it being Apple's inaugural release. However, at the 11th hour, Sly was persuaded to re-sign with his current label, Epic Records, for a significantly less lucrative deal. The reasons remained shrouded in the fog of his complex mind and industry pressure, but the consequence was crystal clear. The Beatles, and most importantly, their notoriously ruthless manager, Alan Klein, felt profoundly and publicly betrayed. Klein, a man known for his vindictive and aggressive tactics, took this as a personal slight. According to industry lore and accounts from Sly's camp, Klein used his immense influence to make Sly's professional life a nightmare. This allegedly included complicating royalty payments, interfering with bookings, and creating a general atmosphere of administrative hostility. Sly came to despise Alan Klein with a passion, and that hatred bled over to the entire Beatles apparatus. What should have been a crowning achievement, being chosen by the Fab Four, became a source of immense financial and legal trouble, a classic example of how Sly's decisions, often mysterious and self-sabotaging, led to his own downfall. If Sly's issue with the Beatles was about business, his disdain for Charles Wright, the Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Band, was purely about art. In the late 1960s, this band scored a massive hit with Do Your Thing, a track that, to the ears of many listeners and industry figures, was a direct lift of the Sly Stone aesthetic. The driving bass lines, the raw guitar work, the call-and-response vocals, it all sounded like a slightly more polished, commercially safe version of the Frisco sound. Sly Stone, an undeniable innovator, did not take this as flattery. He saw them as blatant copycats, artists who were diluting his revolutionary sound for easy commercial gain without bringing any original vision to the table. In his view, they were capitalizing on a vibe he had painstakingly created, profiting from his innovation without having done the hard work of invention. This perceived artistic theft infuriated him. While Do Your Thing is now a classic in its own right, to Sly it was a constant, nagging reminder that for every true originator, there are a dozen imitators waiting to sanitize and sell their vision bow. Back to the world, the Temptations, the corporate takeover. Sly's rivalry with the Temptations represents a more nuanced form of animosity, the fear of being replaced and outmaneuvered by a corporate machine. For years, Motown had been the dominant force in black music, but its polished, choreographed soul was the antithesis of Sly's raw, multiracial, rock-fueled funk. Sly stood in opposition to the Motown machine. However, following Sly's breakthrough, Motown producer Norman Whitfield radically reinvented the Temptations. He took them from sweet soul crooners to purveyors of a harder, grittier psychedelic soul, with hits like Cloud 9, Psychedelic Shack, and the epic Papa Was a Rollin' Stone. This new sound didn't just happen to be funky, it was directly inspired by and competitive with Sly's work. The difference was that Whitfield had the full force of the Motown hit factory behind him. Sly perceived this not as a friendly rivalry, but as a form of corporate co-opting. He saw Motown, the very establishment he had rebelled against, using its immense resources to mimic, package, and mass-produce his own innovative style. The Temptations' success in this new vein felt like a threat. It was proof that the industry could take his dangerous new sound, clean it up, and sell it more efficiently than he could, all while he was struggling with his own personal demons. It was the ultimate indignity, being out-slicked by the system. The relationship between Sly Stone and George Clinton is one of the most fascinating in music history, the king and his would-be successor. Clinton has never been shy about admitting that Sly was his primary inspiration. Parliament Funkadelic's entire ethos, the fusion of rock and funk, the cosmic mythology, the communal band vibe, is unthinkable without Sly's blueprint. However, as the 1970s progressed, their trajectories diverged dramatically. Sly, bogged due, owned by drug addiction, paranoia, and internal conflict, became increasingly unreliable. Meanwhile, George Clinton built P-Funk into a sprawling, commercially successful empire. This dynamic bred a fierce, mostly one-sided rivalry. Sly began to view Clinton's over-the-top theatrics, mothership landings, and cartoonish mythology as a garish, gimmicky perversion of his own innovations. He saw Clinton not as a fellow traveler, but as a court jester who had taken his throne while he was incapacitated. Clinton was expanding the funk universe, while Sly could barely make it to the studio. The resentment was likely born from a painful place of self-recognition and lost potential. Perhaps the most tragic target of Sly's animosity was his own family, both literal and figurative. The family Stone. The band was built on a principle of unity, a rainbow coalition of men and women, black and white, creating together. But as Sly's fame and addiction grew, so did his paranoia. He began to see his band members not as collaborators, but as employees, and then as threats. He grew suspicious of their individual acclaim. He famously fired original drummer Greg Errico for being too stiff, a claim no one who has heard "I Want to Take You Higher" could ever believe. The deepest rift formed with bassist Larry Graham, whose own mother was the band's manager. Sly became convinced Graham was trying to steal the band or undermine him, a tension that culminated in a physical altercation and Graham's acrimonious departure. This was more than hatred, it was a profound betrayal of the very family he had created. He turned on the people who loved him most, isolating himself in a prison of his own making.